Okay, guys, this is your last part writing video of the semester. So last video we talked about the 7 fully diminished 7. We looked at it in context in some real life music and talked about how it functions, what its aesthetic purpose tends to be. So today we are going to just talk about how we build them and resolve them in a 4-part context. Now, the very first thing that we're going to talk about is the construction of the 7 fully diminished 7 in terms of scale degrees. Now, I mentioned this in the last class. The 7 fully diminished 7 acts as a dominant. Part of that is because it shares 3 pitches with the 5/7. But the 7 fully diminished 7 also has an extremely strong pull towards tonic because every single one of its notes is a tendency tone. So every single pitch in the 7 fully diminished 7 wants to go somewhere in the tonic triad quite strongly. Now, I have the 7 fully diminished spelled kind of top down here. So let's talk about each of these chord members in turn. First, we have scale degree 6. Now, we are dealing only with minor keys today. Because of that, scale degree 6 is one of the half-step pairs in the minor mode. So 5 and 6 have a half-step between them in the natural minor. Now, because of that, it has an incredibly strong tendency to resolve down to 5. Plus, on top of that, it's also the chordal 7th. So it has to resolve down by step anyways. Now, we remember when we learned how to write and resolve the 5/7 and later on the 2/7, chordal 7ths always need to resolve downward. So for that reason, scale degree 6, the 7th of your 7 fully diminished 7, needs to resolve down to 5. So that's tendency tone number 1. Now let's talk about scale degree 4, which is the 5th of the harmony. In a 7/7, scale degree 4 is going to behave the same exact way it would in a 5/7. Now let's spell a 5/7 up from the bottom. 5, 7, 2, and 4. So in a 5/7, scale degree 4 is the chordal 7th, and it needs to resolve down by a step. In a 7/7, it adopts that same tendency. So even though it's not the chordal 7th, scale degree 4 still resolves down to 3. Now, let's talk about scale degree 2 because this is the challenge of the 7/7. Scale degree 2 can go in either direction. It can go up to scale degree 3 or down to scale degree 1. The thing that is going to determine which of those paths it takes is the voicing of the harmony. And we'll see that later on down the page. There are particular voicings that necessitate certain resolution patterns. Last but not least, this is the easiest one. Scale degree 7 is the leading tone. And as always, it has an extremely strong tendency to resolve up to 1. So when we're looking at that 7 fully diminished 7 chord, all 4 members want to go to very specific places. The one exception is scale degree 2. There's a little bit of option there. But the other 3 chord members have a very strong tendency to move in very specific ways. Now, one of the features of the 7/7 that we talked about in the last video is its intervallic construction. We already know that it is a series of stacked minor thirds. But if we take every other note in that 7/7, so let's say the root and the 5th, or the 3rd and the 7th, it creates 2 interlocking tritones. So the root to the 5th gives us a tritone, and then the 3rd to the 7th also gives us a tritone. That's part of what creates that characteristic kind of spooky sound. We have 2 very tense tritones that are locked into one another. Now, that's cool from a kind of aesthetics purpose and a sound purpose, but it also has really significant implications for the resolution. And what's written here in bold is the important thing that you have to remember. Diminished fifths resolve in by step, whereas augmented fourths resolve out by step. Now, to your ear, if I went to the piano and played a diminished fifth, you wouldn't be able to tell me if it's a diminished fifth or an augmented fourth. They sound exactly the same. The difference is how they are spelled. So let's take a look at this C minor 7/7 that we have written down here. I've taken this first tritone, so the root and the fifth, which is B natural and F, and I've written it two different ways. So first here we have a B natural with an F on top of it. That is a flavor of a fifth. It's a diminished fifth. And that is going to need to resolve inward by step. And what I mean by that is each voice is going to move in by either a half or whole step. Now, to some degree, that's going to be intuitive to you because this is an altered pitch, right? We've taken B flat from the key signature and we've raised it. Raised pitches, so chromatically raised pitches, want to keep going up. Chromatically flattened pitches want to keep falling down. So you already kind of intuitively, I think, would know and understand that B natural wants to resolve up anyways. You then have to resolve the F that completes that diminished fifth in the opposite direction. So contrary motion for the resolution of that diminished fifth. Now, likewise, what we have here in this second measure, the diminished fifth has just been inverted. Same two notes, right? We still have the B natural and the F, but they are just inverted. So now, rather than diminished fifth, we have an augmented fourth. I want you to keep that same notion, though, of raised pitches want to keep going up. So that B natural wants to resolve up anyways. You just need to remember to find the tritone against it and resolve it in the opposite direction. So the same two notes, but the thing that determines how they resolve is what configuration they are in. Are they spelling a diminished fifth or are they spelling an augmented fourth? Now, similarly, I've gone and done the same thing with the other pair. So now we have the third and the seventh of that harmony. And let's see now how they would resolve in those two instances. So now we have the diminished fifth here, D to A flat. It's going to resolve inward by step to create that major third. And then likewise, if we flip it the other way and make an augmented fourth, that is going to resolve outward by step. Now, the other reason this is important is especially when you have these diminished fifths, if you resolve them in the same direction, you're planing from a diminished fifth to a perfect fifth. And we want to avoid that at pretty much all costs. So the best foolproof way to avoid that is to always resolve your tritone in contrary motion. So your 7/7 has two of these tritones then. So when we're looking at resolving them, there's a bit of a kind of hierarchy of what's most important, what's slightly less important. And the most important thing is your tendency tones. So to start, you've got to make sure 7's going to 1, 6 is going to 5, and 4 is going to 3. If you can, also try and resolve both tritones in that kind of contrary motion. Now, sometimes because of voicing issues, depending on how the chord is spelled, you might find yourself a little bit in a pinch. That's where that duality of scale degree 2 comes in. Scale degree 2 can resolve either up or down, and you have to make that choice depending on how the rest of your chord is voiced. When all else fails, make sure that you are resolving the tritone against the bass properly. There's going to be one, right? No one gets away with not being part of a tritone in this harmony. So whatever way that harmony is voiced, find the tritone against the bass and make sure you're resolving that in contrary motion if all else fails. Okay, I would like to spell and resolve a couple of these with you. This is really similar to what you're going to do on our 2C for homework. So if you flip to the other side of your handout, I have already written out some Roman numeral patterns for you. You've been given a soprano line. I've chosen some Roman numeral patterns for us to work with. They all deal with a 7-7 sandwich. So you've got some sort of tonic, a 7-7 in an inversion of sorts, and then another tonic. And you can see just by the patterns that I have here that not all of these tonic chords are in root position. We have a couple that are in first inversion. You even could get some second inversion chords if you have the 7-7 in its last inversion, but that's something that's more of a theory 2 exploration. So we're going to stick with these. Let's go ahead and work out this first one together. So we're going to spell out our E minor triad. All of these are in minor keys. So let's spell out our E minor triad. We already have a scale degree 5 in the soprano. We need an E in the bass for the root. And then I'm going to put my second E here. And how about my third in the tenor there? Okay, now let's talk about this 7-6-5. If you are a letter name person, which I know a lot of you are from your hard copy homeworks earlier in the semester, let's spell out that 7-6-5 in letter names. So the root is our leading tone, so we have to remember that we need an accidental on that. So we've got D sharp, and then we've got F sharp from the key signature, A, and C. So in scale degrees, if that's helpful for you, that's 7, 2, 4, and 6. Now, we are in 6-5, so that means that our third is going to be in the bass, which will be our F sharp. So let's go ahead and put that in our bass voice. And given the soprano line that you've already got, we see that we have the C taken care of, scale degree 6. So now that leaves us with a D sharp and an A that we need to navigate. Now, looking at the way this is spelled out, we can get away with this with some pretty decent voice leading. Now, before I go to that, though, some of you may be looking at this and looking at the bass against the soprano and saying, ma'am, you have parallel fifths. So one of the challenges with the 7-7 that can be confusing is that you've got fifths all over the place. You've just got to be really conscious of the quality of them. So if we look here between soprano and bass, we have a perfect fifth. Octave displaced, but a perfect fifth nonetheless. We moved them here to F sharp and C. That quality fifth is diminished. Now, in the world of fifth motion, moving from perfect to diminished is actually okay. We do it all the time when we are moving into the dominant 7, and we just sort of have accepted it and we don't talk about it very much, but it happens all the time. So moving from perfect to diminished is okay. And that's why I'm not bothered by this soprano and bass situation that we have right here. But let's talk about our inner voices. We need a D sharp and we need an A. And they are pretty much custom made to go D sharp in the alto and A in the tenor. Now all we have to do is resolve, and I'm going to take some time to mark our tendency tones and make sure that we are resolving them all the way we should be. So tendency tone number 1 is scale degree 6 right here, and that needs to resolve down to 5, which was already done for us. We have scale degree 7 in our alto. That's our leading tone, and we know 7 needs to resolve up. So our scale degree 7 will resolve up. To tonic there. And then last but not least is scale degree 4. So scale degree 4 is in our tenor. And just like in the 5/7, 4 has to resolve down to scale degree 3. And so we'll do that. And then we have a 1/6 as our final harmony, so we do need a scale degree 3 in the bass as well. So looking at that then, we have our 3 tendency tones that all went where they're supposed to. 4 goes to 3, 7 up to 1, and 6 down to 5. And then we have our bass, which in this case we've got scale degree 2 and it goes up to 3. And remember, we had 2 different options for what scale degree 2 can do, right? Now, this is maybe not our preferred doubling for a triad, right? We've got 1 root, 2/3, and a 5th. That's not terribly uncommon with the 7 fully diminished 7. So don't let that make you uncomfortable. Doubling is kind of the least of your worries with this. Make sure the voice leading is okay before you go worrying about doubling. Now, as a last thing, let's look at the 2 tritones within the 7/7 and see how they're moving. So tritone against the bass is our first priority. So we've got F sharp in the bass. The tritone against it is in soprano. So F sharp to C is a diminished 5th. It's a flavor of a 5th, right? Diminished 5ths fall in by step. And we see that that F sharp went up to G and our C went down to B. Made a 3rd. We're in a good spot. And then our other tritone is in our inner voices. We have an A up to a D sharp. This time that's a 4th, so that's an augmented 4th. Augmented 4ths need to resolve out by step to form a 6th, which we did. So we check all the boxes with this particular progression. You have got 2 more. You have a 1 that goes to a 7/7, then back to 1. And then you have a slightly more active bass line in the F minor example with 1 that goes to 7/4/3 and then a 1/6. So go ahead and work these out. My one tip is be careful where you place your alto in this second example because you have this big leap in the soprano. So you've got to make sure that your alto starts relatively close to your soprano so that you don't get more than an octave away for that second chord. So play around with that, be aware of that particular trap. But go ahead and work these 2 out and then come back. We'll compare answers. After you have done the actual part writing, I want you to go through and find your 3 tendency tones, make sure they're resolving in the proper ways, and then find the 2 tritones and see how they are behaving as well. And then come on back and we will check our answers. Okay, so I zoomed in a little bit because there's a lot going on in a small amount of space. So let's take a look at that D minor example. Now, our voicings might be slightly different, but like I said, you don't have a ton of options because the alto needs to be quite close to the soprano to start. So first off, let's just make sure we have all 4 notes in the 7/7. So if we're spelling from the ground up, we've got C sharp, which is the root, E, G, and B flat. You need one of everybody, no incomplete chords. So full 7th chord, 1 member per voice. Since we're in root position, the leading tone goes in the bass. So now let's check our 3 tendency tones. We have scale degree 7 in the bass, and that resolves up to 1. We have scale degree 6, which is our chordal 7th, resolving down by step to 5. So wherever you have that scale degree 6, whether it be in the alto or the tenor, make sure it's resolving down to scale degree 5. And then last but not least, scale degree 4 needs to be resolving down to scale degree 3. Scale degree 2 is our wild card, and that's actually in the soprano, and as it's notated here, it resolves down to scale degree 1. So now let's look at our tritones and see how they have been treated. First priority, is the tritone against the bass. So I have it bracketed here. It's a little tough to tell, but wherever your G is, whether it's in the tenor or the alto, that's your tritone against the bass. C sharp up to G, it's going to be a diminished fifth. So diminished fifths need to resolve in. We have scale degree 7 that's resolving up, and then the G is resolving down to F. So our diminished fifth resolved in to give us a minor third, which is exactly what we are looking for. Now, let's take a look at our other tritone. So wherever your B flat is, that is a tritone against the given soprano of E. And since the soprano is given, you know it's an augmented fourth, no matter whether it's in your alto or your tenor. Now, augmented fourths, we said, want to resolve outward into some flavor of a sixth. We had our B flat, which is our chordal seventh, had to resolve down by step. But the soprano line I gave you also resolved down by step. So let's take a look at what interval that left us with. So now we have between our soprano and our tenor, now we have A up to D. That gives us a perfect fourth. Now, we said that scale degree 2 was our wild card, right? And that's what's in the soprano in the 7-7 is scale degree 2. It can resolve up to 3 or down to 1. In this case, it decided to resolve down to 1. Now, had it resolved up to 3, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The augmented fourth would have resolved in contrary motion, and we would be moving on to the F minor example. However, this one resolved down to 1. From a doubling perspective, that's great. We've got 2 roots, a third, and a fifth, which is a nice preferred doubling. But let's talk about this idea of going from an augmented fourth to a perfect fourth. As much as we like the tritone, the augmented fourth, to resolve out by step, going from an augmented fourth to a perfect fourth is actually fine. There are no rules in regards to the motion of fourths. So what's going on here in this D minor example is not breaking any rules. Given free rein, you would maybe want to compose a different soprano line. But I gave you this particular one to show you that you can't always resolve both tritones the way you want to. In the instance of an augmented fourth, if scale degree 2 is involved like that, you're likely going to be okay. You're just going to have an augmented to a perfect fourth, which doesn't break any rules. It just might land you on better doubling, which some people might find preferable to that tritone resolution. As long as all 3 of your tendency tones are resolving properly and the tritone against the bass is resolving properly, you are good to go. So with that in mind, let's now look at the F minor example. Now, the F minor example, we're dealing with an inversion of the 7 chord. This one is the 7-4-3, so it's the second inversion, which puts scale degree 4 in the bass, and that moves us to a first inversion tonic triad because 4 is one of our tendency tones and has to resolve down. So first, check your spelling. The leading tone was given to you, but we also need a G, a B, and a D flat in there somewhere. Again, no skipping notes. Now let's check our tendency tones. We already got 4 going down to 3. 7 up to 1 was given to you, so I need you to find that D flat. That's your scale degree 6. That's your chordal 7th. That needs to be resolving down by step as well. Now, so that's point number 1. If you're good there, we'll keep it moving. Let's find the tritone against the bass. It's going to be in your soprano. So your bass is on B flat. The Roman numeral told you that. The soprano was given to you. That's your E natural. That builds an augmented fourth. So our augmented fourth wants to resolve out by step. Since it's against the bass, it has to. And custom made, that was 7 and 4, so 7 already went to 1 and 4 down to 3. We are good to go. Last thing then to check is, just for fun, let's look at what the other tritone is doing. The way I have this voice, and the way you will too, it's going to be between your inner voices. if you have this voice differently, they might be flip-flopped. So you might have a diminished fifth rather than an augmented fourth. Because of the way I've got this voiced, I have an augmented fourth between my alto and my tenor, D flat up to G. Because my D flat is resolving down and my G is actually resolving up this time, that gives me a strict resolution of that tritone as well. So both of my tritones are resolving in a favorable way. Now, what that does mean though is I don't get the best doubling for that final triad. So D minor example, we got great doubling. Our augmented fourth did not resolve in that strict fashion. F minor example, augmented fourth resolved in the strict fashion, left us with 2/3, a root, and a fifth in our final triad. Again, neither is more or less correct. They are two pathways to the same end result, more or less. So on our 2C, I'm asking you to just basically do this. There is an in-class exercise of the same fashion, so you can go in and practice and play around a little bit. And then the assignment itself is due by class time on Wednesday. Wednesday is your last synchronous class, so we will meet one last time. And I will also be putting up your project information sooner rather than later. So have fun, and I will see you guys in class on Wednesday.